Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is Abby Schonecker, Marketing Specialist at Spok, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today, we will be talking about the 5 details to include in every communication project plan to maximize success. Jason Stanlin, Mobility Solutions Expert at Spok, will share important activities that should be considered critical to the success of your next project. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Everyone will be muted during today's webinar, but we welcome your participation. Please submit your questions via the questions box in the GoToWebinar toolbar, and Jason will answer as many questions as time allows after the presentation. A recording of this webinar and the presentation slides will be sent to all registrants tomorrow, so please feel free to share these with others at your organization. At the end of the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to complete a short evaluation. We'd love it if you could take a couple of minutes to complete this survey. Your feedback helps our efforts to provide you with relevant and informative presentations. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jason, who will begin our presentation.
All right, thank you, Abby. I appreciate the introduction and look forward to this presentation today. Thanks everybody for joining. So let's kick it off right now. I'm gonna ask a question of the audience, and as did you know that 56% of projects deliver less value than expected? We've covered this in some of our other webinars as well. It's a pretty startling statistic, though. It means over half of the projects out there aren't fully, really delivering on the value that the business and the organization is expecting. And that's your value on your investment, right? So we want to increase that. That is everything in the world of project management and IT service delivery. So today, what we're going to talk about is the 5 details to include in a communication plan. And the reason why we're going to focus on this topic is, I'll talk about a stat in a moment, is that communications has a very direct impact on project success. So today we're going to talk about sort of the why, which is tips on how to create a vision, mission, and goals for your project. We're going to talk about the who, which is your target audience and how you might segment that audience. We're going to talk about key positioning and messaging, which is sort of the what you're going to communicate. We're going to talk about when you might want to communicate this information to your users during a project. And we'll talk about a timeline that can be driven by organizational change management standards. And lastly, we'll talk about how. So how you might architect marketing plans to deliver to your end users. So when we talk about a communication plan today, we're focused on an outbound communication plan that's executed and directed toward your end users inside of your organization. So there's a lot of different types of communications plans. So, right, you might have project communications plan for the project team, stakeholder communications plans for your stakeholders. This is specifically focused on how you might communicate to your end users as you deploy technology in your hospital. So first, you got to make sure you know who should be involved in this communication planning process. And what we see at Spok is most effective is that there is a named Spok service owner. Generally, that can be an IT, or it could be a clinical resource, but it needs to be a single person who's accountable to drive this communication plan. We've got a lot of other roles here, which I won't read through, that you should make sure that you're making responsible for certain parts of building the communication plan, consult with certain people, inform certain people on what you're doing. I will always recommend that you do a RACI when you're developing any kind of communication plan so that you understand who's responsible for what, who you're going to inform, who you're going to consult with. So again, I'm not going to name all these roles, but you can use this as an example and create your own. In terms of vision, mission, and goals, here's another did you know, 80% of projects meet their original goals if they're driven by highly effective communication. So this is sort of what I was talking about a couple slides ago, where I said, hey, we're seeing 56% of projects not delivering as much value as expected. Well, how do we increase the value? We want to make sure that we're meeting our original goals, and we can do that by driving the project through highly effective communication. So this is really critical to the success of any project. And you can see that through the statistics. A key strategy here that I found in my experience here at Spok, because I was a Spok customer for 9 years at a large academic hospital, and I've worked as a consultant for Spok now for about 3 years or so. And what I've found is that a lot of our customers that I work with And even myself, when I was a customer, I kind of defined adoption itself as sort of a goal. So how many users are using the system? How many messages are they sending, for example, would be things that are talking about adoption. Technology adoption should not be your goal. Your goals should drive adoption. So your goals should be centered around your users and the benefits that you're driving for your users, right? Not the numbers of how many users are using the solution. So you want to start with your vision. Begin with the vision and the value of your organization. There's an example there of maximizing continuous quality improvement through investment in technology. That's an actual vision statement or part of a mission statement of an organization that we just looked at online. But you use your own, right? What is a high-level vision of the organization that you support? This is probably going to be something clinical in nature. And this is going to come from your key stakeholder. You can also, obviously talk to leadership. It's probably posted on your website for your organization. But you want to make sure that you're very clear on the vision statement that you're going after, that you're trying to improve with the project and with the technology that you're implementing. Your mission is going to support your vision. So with your mission, you want to state how your project specifically will help your organization achieve the vision that you have outlined. So you could have an example of implementing an enterprise communication plan, for example, to maximize continuous quality improvement by improving patient workflows. So that could be a potential mission statement. You do want to keep it high level and simple. Keep things simple. Don't overthink it. Then you want to distill that down into goals. And at this point, you want to state measurable goals that will help you achieve your mission. At this point, you're getting down to more of the numbers, like, for example, reducing ED throughput by 37 minutes or reducing door-to-balloon time or response to sepsis. So, these are specific metrics. And you can also use hospital compare as a tool. You can obviously get with your quality improvement group, which is really the best source for this type of stuff, to say, okay, if we're trying to improve patient care and quality or patient sat, let's say, or specific HCAP scores or CMS scores, those are great goals to help support high-level visions. And you can get that kind of stuff, like I said, through your quality improvement team, or if you go online, just Google CMS Hospital Compare and look up your hospital. You can find some publicly reported statistics that can help you navigate to understand where your organization's gaps are and where you might be able to leverage your project to fill those. This is a really nice tool that I've used a lot in my experience. This is a simple vision pyramid. And the way that this works is you have your vision at the top. Your mission supports your vision. Your goals support your mission. And then you can go much further down than this. You can distill the goals down into specific tactical objectives, and then beyond the objectives, you can distill that down into metrics. And then from the metrics, you can distill those down into measures. So you can include even KPIs or key performance indicators and critical success factors. If you want, just probably Google Vision Pyramid, and you can find some examples, and you can go really, really deep and get really, really specific about what you're trying to accomplish. It's really critical that you do this type of exercise at the very least, because it's going to feed into your project business case, and it should be the very thing that drives. It's at the heart of your communication plan. Did you know that 49% of physicians feel like they're kept informed of their organization's plans and direction? That's over half of physicians don't feel like they're kept informed of organizations' plans and direction. So that's, I think, the inverse of this statistic is the more important thing to look at is, why are there over half of physicians feeling like they're not kept informed? Things are just sort of put on them rather than them being involved in it and them having some input. So it's really critical, obviously, that you're including your end users and stakeholders as you're making decisions. This is some statistics from the advisory board, and it shows that the question is, which aspects of the organization strategy you want to weigh in on the most? And physicians were asked about this, and they responded that they care about physician workflow issues. So workflow is obviously can be very frustrating for physicians if they have to page someone, for example, on a one-way pager and wait on a call back, and the workflow can be broken. They got to call the operator and wait, and it can really impede on their ability to do their job. So making that more efficient with really useful communication tools, for example, could really help improve this. And it's important to know this kind of thing. And you might even consider having some surveys that go out at the very beginning of your project as you're building your business case, so that you can round out your goals and objectives to align with not just the overarching vision of your organization, but also considering the input from end users. What do they care about? What do they want to improve? So some calls to action here is I always suggest at the beginning of any project, create a vision pyramid. It's a simple exercise. It's actually not as easy as it may seem, but the framework is quite simple, right? And then it'll allow you to distill something that's very high level and in the clouds into something very tactical and tangible that you can execute against. Establish and agree on SMART goals, and this obviously has to be an effort that is pursued with your key stakeholders that are supporting, that actually have stake in the vision, the mission that you're trying to pursue with the project. The SMART goal, obviously, I'm not going to state out all the what the acronym means. You can Google that, but they just need very specific and measurable goals. Okay, create a formal business case. The pyramid and the SMART goals should be fed into a formal business case that includes other aspects like justification and strategic alignment and alternatives and different things like that. There's a lot of business case templates online. We also offer them through Spok if you engage with our consultant services group. And it should, again, include the first two there in your business case. So I've talked about just sort of developing a vision, a mission, goals, objectives, getting them into a business case. Now you're understanding what is it that we're actually trying to do here. We also need to then focus on identify who is this going to benefit. Who's going to also be impacted. So that's the two different areas you need to be thinking about. Because being impacted doesn't necessarily mean that you're being benefited, but you need to lay out very succinctly with what you're trying to accomplish in the business case, who is going to be impacted and who's going to benefit. So know your audience. Are you going to be impacting physicians, nurses, radiologists, operators, the labs, executives, any kind of other ancillary staff? Make sure that you know those individuals, and include plans for how you'll communicate to stakeholders. So here's sort of tying together some of the things that we've just talked about. What you might start with is a goal, and the organizational goals should drive your target workflows, right? So let's say I have a goal of improving, you'll use an easy one of improving ED throughput. As you can see down here at the bottom, that's actually an example of, let's say our goal is to reduce time from admit decision to time of departure from the ED. So that's really throughput during the hospital admissions process. You can actually then map out the workflow of each individual, document and process that's involved in moving the patient from the ED and getting them admitted. And figure out who's involved, who is in that workflow. At that point, you can distill it down into the personas, who's going to be impacted and or benefit from the change to the workflow. So you start with the goal, you understand what workflow or workflows will support that goal and drive that goal, where do you need to make these improvements. You're going to then figure out how do I optimize this process to make it more efficient so I can work to achieve my goal. And a lot of time in order to do that with a workflow, you can apply a framework like Six Sigma, for example, to evaluate the process and understand where there are gaps and opportunities to improve it. And then again, once you get that final, new process that you're trying to pursue, it'll help you understand who's going to be involved, who's in that workflow, because you'll see those individuals show up in the workflow that you map out. So in my opinion, in my experience, this is the most successful way to approach things. You start with your vision, your mission, and you get these goals that are distilled down from that. Your goals are then going to drive what your workflows that you target, and the workflows should help you distill down your personas and who's going to be impacted and benefited from the changes. You can segment your audience in a lot of different ways. You might segment by role or specialty because the labs and radiologists, they care about very different things than nurses, and they care about different things than physicians. So everybody has different, each role has a very different sort of persona applied to it. And we'll show some examples here in a moment of that. You can also segment by device type. There may be specific users that are using SpectraLink devices in your environment. There may be users that are using Androids and others that are using iOS. And those users may have different needs. There may be different things you need to communicate to them, especially when it comes to knowledge and deploying sort of training and onboarding programs to the users. There could be differences in the devices and the behavior of the application on the devices that would warrant you segmenting your communication to ensure that you're communicating very directly to a particular person by device. You could get that data from like a mobile device management tool if you have it in place, or you could potentially get that during as you register users into your system, if you're registering them into a system. So application usage is another one. If you have sort of a way to measure, like within Spok, there are ways to figure out what applications users are logging into and leveraging. Is the user using, for example, a secure messaging app? Do they even have it installed on their device? Are they using it heavily? You might want to actually segment out your especially when you do upgrades, right? You might want to tell users that are heavy users one thing. Here are the new features. You might want to tell new users or users who aren't even using it, like something totally different, because why are you going to communicate your new features with an upgrade to people that aren't even using it? You want to focus more on the overarching benefits of the tool, if that makes sense. So application usage, device type, and role specialty, there's tons of different ways you might want to segment your audience, but those are some key things I've found to be very useful. When you're thinking about segmenting by role, think about your audience personas. You might have an attending physician, a surgical nurse. You may have a CMIO. Map them out. You can create full personas, and we have some examples that we can provide to you. If you want to just go into GoToMeeting and chat in the forum here that you'd like us to provide you some of these examples that you see here in front of you. But what you can do is actually interview your end users and send out some surveys to specific roles. And I would suggest that you create these little personas that sort of map out, what does the attending physician at my hospital care about? What are their general goals and frustrations? What kind of personalities do they have? What kind of high-level needs and low-level needs are they needing as well? And this is obviously like a big overarching sort of generalization, but it's going to get you more in the ballpark of what your audience cares about rather than just totally generic messaging across the board, right? Because again, your nurses, your radiologists, and your attending physicians are going to be very different. So you might want to take some of these attributes that we've put into this and apply it to your organization and create your own personas. You don't have to take every single section that we've used, but this is a very helpful exercise. It might seem like this is overkill. I guarantee you, if you go through this exercise, it will not feel like overkill. When you have these to reference, and you can actually cut and paste specific words that have into your messaging, into your email campaigns and everything that you're sending out, they're really specifically the goals that you've identified in your target audience. It can be a very powerful thing. Got to understand their pain points, their frustrations, and their needs. This is an additional slide that kind of shows some additional things that we've adapted about this particular persona, this attending physician persona. And this, again, you could take some of this stuff if you find it useful, like what kind of technology usage you might expect from this role and how they prefer to communicate could be good ones. Other things perhaps you want to leave out. Again, we do have templates for these things. If you're interested, just use the chat in the chat function and go to webinar, and we are happy to provide them to you. Another call to action. So you need to identify your target audiences that will be impacted and benefited. We talked about the differences between impacted and benefited. Make sure you're identifying those, and you'll do that through understanding what workflows you're going to impact. Identify direct organizational and patient benefits, right? You need to make sure that you're aware of those, and then segment the target audience by interests and benefits. So if you create these personas that we talked about, and then you understand which roles are going to be impacted by the project, then you can apply the information that you have in your personas to the benefits. You compare them to the benefits that your project is going to deliver, and then you can adapt very specific, targeted, segmented messaging to your end users. It's a very useful approach. It's much more relevant then to your end users as opposed to just giving them these broad strokes of messaging that they sort of just discard and don't even pay attention to. You want to speak directly to your audience. When you think about positioning and messaging, when you're talking, you're formulating your actual messages and how you're going to position your solution to your audiences. I always suggest that you focus on patient care satisfaction and privacy. There are key areas that you can address to your audience to talk about, like how you're helping to improve patient care and stat and privacy. You also, of course, want to focus on the benefits specific to that end user. How are we addressing your specific pain points? I always suggest that you position the solution overall as a clinical initiative. So even if it's an IT tool, let's say, for example, you're deploying Spok. Spok is an enterprise communication platform. There's a lot of IT infrastructure on the back end of implementing a Spok solution, but the users don't need to know that. The users just need to know how it's going to impact the hospital operations, their clinical delivery, and how it's going to make their lives better. So if you make it a clinical initiative and position it that way and have, for example, your clinical leaders, key stakeholders, CMIO, for example, or CMO, maybe you even have champion physicians that are sending out these communications rather than coming out from IT, it can be much more powerful. Physicians are definitely motivated by their peers. So make sure that you're considering that. And drive the communication from key stakeholders. That's kind of what I just mentioned. Identify some key clinical stakeholders. Again, it could be really influential physicians that you want to have those messages come from, because then that from field in the email that goes out, or in the, if there's a quote that you post as a call out on your website, it matters to the recipient. It does. Stay clear, concise, and consistent. Use plain language, speak in their terms, make it relevant to the audience through segmentation. Limit your word count. Use a short burst strategy is what I call it. It's sort of a, sort of a tip of the month type thing. It's sort of a Twitter world these days, right? So we can only handle a little bit of information at a time. I think that particularly people in the medical field who have a lot on their plate, they can only take just like a couple sentences at a time, right? If you give them valuable information in a couple sentences here and there, they're going to retain it, especially if you make sure it's very relevant at that particular point in time. If you inundate them with a lot of messaging all at one time in the very beginning of the deployment, you're just going to overwhelm them and they're going to forget about 98% of what you try to communicate. Use pictures when possible, build a storyline. You want to make sure that you're telling a story, and don't change mid-flight. Don't promise a bunch of goals and stuff and then change your position in the middle of the project. Now, there's a couple key things to this slide too. You can notice there's 3 bullets under 3 topics. There's some alliteration going on. These are things that help people remember, right? The power of 3 is a very powerful thing. Try to lump things in sections of 3. So instead of having all these bullets at the very bottom of the slide listed on the slide, I've broken it up into pieces, and it just makes it easier for you to consume. And that's how you should really be communicating to your end users. Make sure you're explaining the problem. Users don't always know that there is a problem. A lot of times, physicians just get used to the pain, and nurses and ancillary staff. Everyone just when there's a broken workflow, just sort of adapt to it and they get used to it. And even, I've seen these really horribly broken workflows where physicians and nurses are yelling down hallways, and we try to put in some technology to streamline everything and make it easier. But they still sort of reject it because they're so used to doing it in a broken way. So it is painful for them. They just don't realize it. They've gotten used to it. They've gotten used to the pain. So it's hard sometimes that you absolutely have to articulate what is this pain point that we're trying to address, and you have to bring it out and bring it to life in your communication. When it comes to your key messaging, remember you want to stick to your mission. The vision is that high-level thing that comes from the organization. The mission is really what you're trying to do to physically achieve that vision and make it come to life. So explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. Make sure that the user is very clear on that. And obviously make sure you explain the benefits to the user. Make sure you know that you're illustrating their current pain point and that you're illustrating how you can resolve it. And then your organizational goals, explain the benefits to the organization. Make sure you show how it impacts the user, right? How are the org changes actually going to relate specifically to that user? So here's an example of key messaging, how you might take a mission and break it down into some goals, and then from there break it down to specific user benefits. Here's another way of looking at it, where you might connect organizational goals to user benefits. You might say that if we improve ED throughput, it's going to reduce the wait time for ED physicians in a particular workflow, or hospitalists in an admission process, for example. So you can if you're talking about really high-level goals, when you start segmenting and focusing on key roles and within your audience, you want to make sure if I want to accomplish this goal, what does it mean for the organization, but what does it also mean for this particular role? Is it going to help make their lives easier? Am I going to help them be more productive and efficient? Am I going to be able to take some pain away? How does achieving this particular goal affect these users? So you can translate your goals into benefits. That's a really important thing to do, because otherwise it may just look like this high-level thing and your user can't relate to it. Your calls to action, you want to tie organizational goals to direct user benefits. Craft messaging that clearly articulates your benefit. You don't want to obviously make it muddy. Just make it very clear and straightforward, and make sure your benefits are relevant to the target audience. A lot of times, this deck, goes through a lot of different areas and hits them at a very high level. These are simple concepts, it's a simple framework to sort of follow. But if you don't do these things, you'll end up in the boat that we started in, which is those projects that fail, right? This is not overkill. This is definitely essential stuff to consider. A lot of times where I see organizations struggle is trying to understand when do I communicate specific pieces of information. So you're architecting your marketing plan, your communication plan, and you're trying to understand then, okay, well, we got to communicate tons and tons and tons of information for an enterprise communication software deployment, for example. How in the world are we going to communicate all of this information to the users and have them retain it and actually adjust to it and adapt to it? So what I would always suggest, and this is something you need to apply at a higher level, ideally it's already in place at your organization, is to apply all the frameworks of organizational change management to the way that you communicate. And your communication plan really should just be tucked into your organizational change management framework. Did you know that 96% of projects meet or exceed objectives of the project when excellent organizational change management is included? So what is organizational change management? A lot of you may not know that. You may be thinking of technology change management, which means I'm going to make a change to a technology and I have to manage that. Well, we're not talking about that here. We're actually talking about a higher level organizational change management. It relates to how your users adapt to new things, how to change. How do they accept the change? Do they start actually embracing it and benefiting from a change? Not all changes are good. So OCM frameworks, or organizational change management frameworks, are intended to make sure that every change that you make is actually having a good impact. So there's a framework called ADKAR that we use at Spok when we consult with our customers through consultative services. And it's a very simple framework at its core, and ADKAR is the acronym for what you see here. It drives you through sort of the user journey, if you will. So they first gain awareness around the change, like what kind of change is coming, right? And then you want to create desire. You want to make sure that they say, ooh, I know about this change and I also want it. Then you got to develop knowledge. Once they say they want the change, well, how do they get it? How do we implement it? And then we go through the ability phase, which the ability phase relates to, okay, now that they have the knowledge, do they have the ability to use the new tool, let's say, or whatever? Or they have the ability to adjust to the new change? And then there's reinforcement, which says, hey, we've made this change. We want to continue to reinforce it so you don't go back to your old behavior. Ensure the change sticks. So what you can do is you can leverage this type of framework to actually architect your communications plan. We often do this within Spok. So we say, all right, 2 months before we go live, we're going to communicate out messages around our mission, our 3 user benefits and 3 goals. We're actually going to send out emails, post some things to websites and screensavers. And the goal of what we're trying to do here is to build awareness around the change. Then a month before we go live, we're going to communicate out messages around the results from pilots that we're going to run. We're going to gain some peer testimonials, and we're going to have some key targeted messages that are actually going to go to segmented users. Again, we have some tactics of how we're going to send that out, and the goal of this is to create desire, right? We want to show the user that it's valuable, that we've achieved results, that their peers are supportive of the change, and the influential peers in particular, and that we provide messaging that is very relevant to you at a particular given time. And that's going to make you sort of get on board, hopefully. That's the goal. 2 weeks before we go live, we might have key messages like that's a little more tactical about how we're going to roll this out, how to access and use the technology, what kind of changes are going to occur in the workflows. And that's the intention of developing knowledge of how to make the change. So again, this is real high level. We get a lot more detailed when we build out communications plans with our customers, but this is sort of just a framework to kind of show you as you go through time, what kind of things would you communicate to who and when. So then you get to the ability stage. Let's say the day of go live, or 2 weeks after. So this could be in increments. You're giving onboarding instructions. You're again communicating out changes to workflows. Perhaps you're communicating out some guiding principles and policies. I always suggest that you create those types of things. How should you be adopting this change as a user? And then the goal, of course, is to realize or implement the change. And then lastly, perhaps a day after you go live to at least 6 months, perhaps even more after you go live, you want to keep sending out surveys. You want to create feedback channels and make sure there's available follow-up. You want to keep continuing to track and communicate results and outcomes, and then communicate next steps. How are we going to continue to increase value with these changes? So you got to ensure the change sticks by continuing to reinforce. But you can't implement anything in any environment and just walk away. It just won't be successful. Did you know that 61% of physicians rely on email for updates from the organization? So, I've for quite a while was sort of trying to move away from using any kind of email campaigns because it just felt like it was, physicians don't look at email. But it's not really true. It's actually shown through statistics that a lot of physicians do use email. The key is you got to stand out and you got to be clear and concise and consistent. So when you send your messages out, you want it to come from the right influential stakeholders so that from field gets their eye. You want to make sure you got the right relevant messages that are catered to those particular user. You want to stay clear and simple and use that short burst strategy we talked about, because that's what's going to make it stick out. It's not that emails aren't effective. It's that the way that we're crafting our emails is not effective. So email should be still a part of your campaign, along with other modalities as well that we kind of talked about. So call to action. Before you go live, build awareness and desire for the change. So if you don't have awareness and desire in place, you should never go live. You should also be building knowledge and abilities. There should be knowledge in place. Really, this slide, I think, is probably a little needs an update because the knowledge really needs to come before the go live too. And during the go live, you want to make sure that you're testing the abilities of your users and that you're communicating out things related to abilities. And then after your go live, you want to make sure you reinforce the change and continue to improve the service. So lastly, we're going to talk about, for just a few minutes, how to look at marketing campaigns. And so this is how you're going to deliver all this. So well-strategized campaigns can fuel desire, and that's a key component to enterprise adoption. Clinical users want results, not marketing. They want testimonials, not catchphrases. They want real-world outcomes, not fluff. So the key around this is you want to create campaigns that drive specifically toward results and testimonials and real-world outcomes, as opposed to just putting a bunch of messages out there that don't actually have any proof points behind them, right? So the idea here is that you'd have an overarching campaign, which would be tied to your overarching vision or mission. And then you have these other sub-campaigns that you might have that are targeted towards specific areas. Like, for example, maybe I want to implement an enterprise communication platform to maximize continuous quality by improving workflow. One of my campaigns underneath that is an ED specific one for throughput. Another one is increasing response time and visibility to pain requests. Another is expediting contact with the appropriate on-call person. And each of those sub-campaigns are their own marketing plan. They really specifically aimed at just achieving that one goal. Once that goal is achieved or progress is made toward it, that outcome is fed into the main campaign. And the main campaign obviously goes out to a much larger audience. So you have this overarching campaign that's kind of running that is super high level and being driven by the executives in your organization. And then you have these smaller campaigns, and equate those to pilots, essentially. These are just little pilots that you're running, and you're gathering data from those pilots as supporting proof points that you can use these tools to increase value. Those proof points become very powerful. So here's an example of, a potential enterprise campaign. This is not realistic in terms of the timeline, but you might want to map something out like this, and it just maps what you're going to try to accomplish along a timeline, when you're going to sort of go live with your larger enterprise campaign, and what types of technologies you're going to deploy over time. This is an example, and you'll be getting a copy of this deck. You're welcome to take a look at it. Did you know that 42% of physicians feel their organization is open and responsive to their input? Again, if you look at the inverse of this statistic, it's pretty startling. That means that over half of physicians feel their organization is not open and responsive to their input. That's pretty terrible. So, a key strategy obviously is also to make sure that you keep lines of communication open with your users. It's not a one-way street. You have feedback, you have surveys, you have interviews, you engage, you try to understand the workflows by working with the clinical resources. Nothing can be done in a silo, right? And to make sure the users are involved throughout the entire process. So what we want to do is decide what goal-based outcomes you want that will be communicated. So this is in regard to the marketing campaigns that we talked about. You want to determine how success measures will be gathered, and then you want to create marketing campaigns and input results into your key messages. So as you deploy your pilots and you get metrics from those pilots, for example, you'd feed that up into a larger campaign that would be driven through an executive clinical sponsor, and it would be disseminated out throughout the organization. What that does is it builds brand. It builds, the proof points will strengthen your brand. Post-go live action is critical for adoption. So this sort of goes with the statistic that we just talked about, and that the physicians don't feel like their input is being valued. Well, I want to make sure we're soliciting feedback. So you send out surveys. Always act on your feedback. Don't ever send out surveys or ask for feedback and not do anything about it. That's even worse than just not asking. So I would very, very much encourage you to ask for feedback, take it very seriously, make changes to what you're doing to accommodate the feedback. And then once you make that change to accommodate the feedback, recognize it. Send out more communication that shows that you're listening, right? That's what users want. They want to feel listened to and supported. Validate, don't speculate. Shadow users, have meetings with champions. When I was actually a Spok customer, I used to go and meet with about 6 different physicians every other week. I'd go to their office and sit down with them and talk about some of their pain points, just stay connected with them, right? And they were some of our key knowledge champions, and I would just continue to strengthen relationships with them. Test key messages on your users, right? So before you send out messaging to your broader audience, you want to, test it on specific users that are the same persona. Does this feel good? Am I addressing your pain point? Does this feel like something that would benefit you? And you see it. Is it clear? Measure everything. Email and web click rates, support tickets, app usage. Try to get any statistics you can about how your users are adopting anything that you're deploying. And also focus like that email and web click rates on, are they responding to your communication? Are they clicking on the emails that you're sending out? How much time are they spending on the website when you put a website out there to communicate things? If those statistics, those usage statistics can help alter the way you're delivering your service or solution, and also the way that you're communicating about it. So data is always your friend. And remember that surveys are for the benefit of the users, not you. Don't just try to get stuff, to show your progress out of a survey. Make sure that you're dedicating questions or your surveys around how you can increase value and benefit to the end user specifically. So to summarize, and then we'll take some quick Q&A, make sure that these 5 details are included in your communications plan, that you're outlining your vision, mission, and goals, that that is helping you understand your target audience, and that you do some segmentation. Once you segment it out, you want to understand how you're going to position to specific personas and what you're going to message. What do they care about? What are their key concerns, pain points? What benefits them? You want to drive then the communication when through an organizational change management framework or something simple that helps you understand where a user is at a given point in time and what you need to communicate to them. And you need to have a communication timeline at the very least. And then you got to build marketing plans or campaigns. So the campaigns, again, can support one another and help build out proof points to strengthen your brand. So those are 5 details we'd recommend that you include in a communication plan. We do, of course, offer assistance with this through our consultative services group here at Spok. So we help build marketing plans and deploy them during Spok implementations, and we can provide that consultation to you if you need support. And with that, I'm going to end the presentation and take a couple of moments for Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Jason, for that insightful presentation. We'll now take some time to answer your questions, and it looks like we've had a few submitted already. But as a reminder, if you have a question, please submit it in the questions box, and we'll answer as many as time allows. Okay, so our first question is, this presentation was all about how to communicate to users. Do you have any tips on how to communicate to end users?
Yeah, so this was definitely all about communicating to end users, as I kind of indicated at the very beginning of the webinar. I assume is the question around, clarify, is it around how do you communicate to stakeholders, or I don't know if does it say anything about that?
It says end users.
Okay. So yeah, this presentation was about really kind of how to focus communication on your end users. If you want more information on how to communicate to different segments or different in a different framework, I could certainly speak with you offline if that particular person wants to sync up with us. Just add something to the chat box and we'll follow up with you. We do have other frameworks you might use we even use them internally in terms of communication plans and stakeholder analysis on how do you communicate with your project team and how do you communicate with your stakeholders. So there's a lot of different things you got to do. It's not just communicating to your users. For a project to be successful, you do also have to communicate to your stakeholders, to your project team, and so on and so forth. And again, we can help you with that if you want to get engaged with our consultative services group, but that was a little outside of the scope of this particular presentation.
Yes, we can definitely follow up with you offline. Okay, and another attendee has asked, where can I learn more about ADKAR? Yeah,
ADKAR is a very useful framework, and you simply just Google it, and you will find the website that outlines not only the framework, and you can read up online on their website, but there's also programs that you can go to training. They have training events all throughout the states that you can go and attend and learn more about it. Again, ADKAR is a much higher level organizational change management framework that it sort of spans over communication. Communication can be driven through that framework, but it's more about just managing behavior and culture elements when you're implementing change. Very useful. But I would just suggest Googling it, and their website will pop up to the top as proxy.
Great, thank you. Another attendee asks, do you have any sample communication plans to share?
Yes, we do. I mentioned that at the very end of the presentation. We do help our customers provide our customers with communication plans. We have samples. We also work through our consultative services group to create custom communication plans. So if you're interested in that, you just want to engage with our consultative services group, In order to do that, just reach out to your support or sales representative and inquire about it. If you are doing any kind of project, whether it's an add-on, an upgrade, a new implementation, even if you just want to communicate through to your users to just increase adoption of any of your technologies, we can engage with you and help. So those services are available through our consultative services offerings. That unfortunately we don't just hand that out because there's a lot of work that goes into those efforts. But if you're interested, absolutely reach out and ask for consultative services.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we're almost out of time, so we'll just ask one more question. You mentioned that the Spok service owner should be accountable for the communication plan. Who is this person?
That's a really good question. The race there that I included on one of the first few slides we covered was really just an example. So when we post the presentation out there, you can kind of reference it. But obviously, it's more of a framework. You want to identify yourself at a high level when it comes to the communication plan. Who's going to be accountable, responsible, consulted, and informed? That Spok service owner role kind of was meant to be generic. It doesn't have to be the accountable person, but I do find it to be very, very useful if you identify a Spok service owner on the technical side, so someone at a high executive level within your IT division, and also a Spok service owner or business owner on the clinical side. And then the thing that you need to try to figure out is who is going to drive the communication plan. And I would suggest, as I mentioned in the presentation, clinical side. So I would define that role in the ideal scenario as being a key stakeholder who has been identified as your Spok business owner or service owner from a clinical perspective, that's got stake in the project and is driving the communication.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we're out of time today, so we'll conclude there. If we were unable to get to your question today, we'll be sure to follow up with you. If you'd like to chat with a Spok representative on the topics that we've discussed today, you can do so using the link in your chat box. You can also continue the conversation with fellow attendees by using the hashtag SpokWebinar on Twitter. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook to get all of the latest news from Spok, as well as industry news and trends. Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed this webinar. Have a great rest of your day.